So good evening, everybody. Welcome to KTC SoCal. We are welcoming again Lama Kathy today to work on our book study for Mingyur Rinpoche's book, The Joyful Wisdom. This is an ongoing series, but I think anyone can join in at any time because there's lots of really useful information. Again, like if you see this and you want more information about our KTC, you can go to ktcsocal.org. And also there you can find a donation button if you would like to donate to Lama Kathy for her gracious teaching. And with that, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Hey, thanks very much. I really appreciate the welcome. And my name is Kathy Wesley, and I am part of the Columbus, Ohio KTC. And for the last few months, we've been studying this book by Mingyur Rinpoche, Joyful Wisdom. And we have gotten to chapter 9, the chapter on empathy. And so before we begin tonight, I'd like to invite everyone to refresh their refuge, taking refuge in the Buddha as the teacher, the Dharma as the path, the Sangha as the community of practitioners, and making the Bodhisattva aspiration that through this practice and study, may we accomplish awakening for the benefit of all suffering beings. So with this Bodhisattva motivation in mind, we'll start studying the Dharma. So the chapter on empathy, we just scratched the first paragraph, the surface of the first paragraph, and Mingyur Rinpoche talks about how our self-identity changes continuously with every passing moment. He says our ideas of who we are subject to change. He says, for example, you think I'm a mother or a father or a husband or a wife, I'm an employee, and so forth. But he said, nevertheless, we are deeply entrenched in our habits of relating to ourselves. And when we're entrenched in this way, he says this brings a kind of loneliness, a feeling of being separate from other beings. And then he says we forget about our connectedness to others because we're so busy identifying with our own self, our own self-definition, our own self-experience, which is really, it's overwhelming some days. We have some days we have busy days, and we're completely absorbed in the story of how are we going to finish this day, and so forth and so on. And because we're so absorbed in ourselves, he says the practice of empathy is difficult. He says the practice of empathy takes whatever difficulty or crisis we may be facing as a starting point for recognizing our familiarity and our connection with others. And he says it gradually opens our mind to a profound experience of fearlessness and confidence while transforming personal problems into a strong motivation to help others. And here he talks about the very sad and touching story from the life of the Buddha, where a woman comes to her with her son who has just passed away, has just died, and said, "Buddha, can you bring him back to life?" And the Buddha said, go to your village and bring me back a few mustard seeds from a house where no one has ever died. And the woman, of course, goes back to her village and dutifully begins asking each of her neighbors about these seeds that she needs. And she always said, she said the same question each time: has anyone ever died here? And of course, there was not a single person in the village who did not, no single household in the entire village where there was no death. Then Mingyur Rinpoche said, by the time this poor woman completed her circuit of the village, she came to understand through an experience that touched her more deeply than words ever could, that she was not the only person in the world who had suffered a terrible loss. Though still stricken by grief for the death of her son, she recognized that she was not alone, and her heart opened to others. And eventually she joined the Buddha as a disciple, and she devoted her life to assisting others. It says here, achieve the same degree of recognition of connectedness. And I think that this is something, even though this story is a very extreme story that's very difficult to hear, about death in the family, even though it's a very difficult story to hear, it's something that we can think about in terms of our own life. Those of you who have studied the mind training literature, particularly the 7-point mind training of Chikawa Yeshe Dorje, especially as it's explained by Jamgon Kongtrul the Great in the book, The Great Path of Awakening. In this particular book, Jamgon Kongtrul encourages us to remember and to think about our connection to other beings. So when we are experiencing something negative and painful, he said, it's important to know that that we are not alone in feeling this pain, and that we can at this moment think of all beings who are feeling the same pain as we are. And by doing this, we will not feel so alone. And in not feeling alone, we'll be able to bring to our mind this feeling of kinship or relation to all sentient beings. I remember receiving a call from a woman who had lost a child previously through miscarriage. And she was now pregnant again and was very concerned about her situation. And she said, I feel so alone some nights. And I said, well, maybe, I don't know if this will help or not. I said, but maybe on one of those nights, you might just close your eyes and cast your mind outward and think of all of the other mothers who are sitting tonight feeling concern. And maybe you should, when you think of these other women, then maybe it would help you if you would sort of mentally extend your arms and give them a hug and pray that they and you get through the hours that are to come, and that you can help to support and uplift each other. And she said that doing this practice did help her. So I think we've all felt this way from time to time. And Mingyur Rinpoche takes this feeling of kinship and takes it a little farther. He talks about his own situation. He said, it's so easy to think that each of us, to think that we're somehow, that other people are, he says, we're born with the happiness handbook, which he says through some accident of birth, we somehow never received. It's very easy to think that other people are more fortunate than we are, and to think that we are uniquely unfortunate. And but he said, when I was young, he said, the anxiety I almost constantly experienced, he said, left me feeling alone, weak and stupid, he said. When I began to practice loving kindness and compassion, however, he said, I found that my sense of isolation began to diminish. He said, at the same time, I gradually began to feel confident and even useful. I began to recognize that I wasn't the only person to feel scared and vulnerable. Over time, he said, I began to see that considering the welfare of other beings was essential in discovering my own peace of mind. And I remember learning the practice of shamatha meditation, where you allow your attention to rest on an object. Maybe it's the breath, maybe it's a visual object, maybe it's an object of sound. And becoming aware of this, then returning our attention to it again and again. When our attention wanders, we gradually become acquainted with all the thoughts that we have on a daily basis. And becoming acquainted with all of these thoughts, we begin to see the stories that we've told ourselves about our life begin to fall into little nuggets of ideas and thoughts, each of which is discrete and each of which is easily let go of one at a time. And when we let go of any thought and we see it disappear, we have this momentary feeling of loss, like, wow, something I owned, something that was mine is now gone. But if we allow the thoughts to go, we begin to see the patterns that form around the stories that form around the thoughts that we have. And by doing this, we discover the stories of our life that are just these little individual discrete thoughts. And by being able to let go of them, we realize that we can begin to change how we experience things, that things may be a little easier to cope with if we come at them one at a time rather than as part of an entire story. So the other thing that I remember a friend of mine was reading to me from Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche's book on compassion, and I can't remember exactly what chapter it was in, or maybe it was in an article instead of the book. But he said that once you've done shamatha and begun to let go of the storyline that you have about your own life, you begin to become aware of that there is some peacefulness and some calm inside you that you didn't know was there. And as you rest in that peace and quiet, he said, you become aware that there are other people in the room meditating with you, and that they're also experiencing their thoughts and their self-identities, and maybe it's painful and maybe it's illuminating. But you begin to feel a kinship with the people you're sitting with and the people you're meditating with. And he said this can, for many people, be the birth of empathy, the first time they have really become aware that other people might just be like them. So he said that on the next page, Mingyur Rinpoche said this realization, he said, he calls it the second stage of let's see here. Oops. Second stage of ordinary love and loving kindness. This empathy that we're talking about. He says once we've been able to stabilize our mind, we can proceed to open our attention a little more broadly. He says we can dissolve the delusion of independently existing selves and others through what is known as loving kindness and compassion practice. And according to, he said, the Buddhist understanding, there are two aspects to empathy. Loving kindness refers to the desire for everyone to achieve happiness and the effort we put forth to achieve that goal. And compassion is the aspiration to relieve everyone from the fundamental pain and suffering that stems from not knowing their basic nature, and the effort we put forth toward helping them achieve relief from fundamental pain. So those of you who've been reciting the 4 immeasurable meditations, may all beings be happy and have the causes of happiness. That's the immeasurable meditation on loving kindness, the wish for others to be happy. And when you say the line, may all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering, that's the fundamental compassionate attitude he's talking about here. And so he said these 2 concerns, the longing for happiness and the wish to be released from suffering, are common, he said, to all living creatures. Not necessarily, you don't necessarily have to be human to wish for happiness. In fact, I remember Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche was giving a teaching once, and he said, if you think about any given day and any given place in the world, he said, you'll see people, dozens and dozens and dozens of people rushing to and fro all day long. And he said, what are they doing? As they rush to and fro, they're all trying to be happy. And he said, so in this way, we are all alike. So Mingyur Rinpoche said that the development of loving kindness comes sequentially, bit by bit. And then on the next page, he talks about the initial stage of loving kindness is referred to as ordinary loving kindness, he says, which begins with developing a sense of loving kindness toward oneself and then extending it toward those we know. And then he said the second stage is known as immeasurable loving kindness and compassion, an extension of this aspiration for happiness and release from suffering toward those we don't know. So he then gives, he says the third stage is known as bodhicitta, the mind that is awake to the suffering of all sentient beings and spontaneously works to relieve that suffering. I remember when Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche first started teaching us about compassion, a few people said to him, well, I want beings to be happy, but I don't know how to make that happen. I don't think I have the skill. And I feel compassion for others, but I don't feel any skill in being able to relieve their suffering. And he said, yes, he understood this. He said, yeah, this is common to all people, because he said, when we start developing this meditation on loving kindness and compassion, he said, it's just an idea. It's just a wish. But he said, you'd be surprised at how powerful that wish can be. He said the wish to benefit beings, the wish to help beings and to relieve their suffering, he says the way he put it, he said it starts a momentum of goodness in your heart that he said eventually becomes self-sustaining. And I've actually met people for whom this is true. I met a gentleman who started working with the loving kindness and compassion practice called Tonglen, or sending and receiving. And in this practice, as you breathe out, you think you give happiness to all beings. And as you breathe in, you think you remove the suffering from all beings. At which point, the suffering, as Khenpo Rinpoche says, dissolves into nothing and disappears. And then you breathe out happiness to beings again and breathe in and remove suffering, and it dissolves into nothing and disappears. And then again, you breathe out and this happiness to beings. And so by doing this practice over and over again, Khenpo Rinpoche said, you gradually train your mind into giving automatically on the out breath and removing suffering on the in breath automatically. He said it takes a while to get used to the practice of imagining that you extend love on the out breath and imagining that you remove suffering on the in breath. And he said, at first, it's just an exercise, he said, that's mostly for you. He said, you're not going to really benefit sentient beings at the outset by developing these thoughts. But he said, over time, by developing these thoughts, he said, you begin to become aware of possible solutions to problems that people have. He said, at first, you don't know anything about anybody and you don't know how to help anyone. He said, but as you are, he says, as you remain quiet and listen and just mentally extend yourself over and over and over again, he said, over time, he said, this development of the wish to benefit beings gives birth to solutions. And my friend said that that was what happened to him after he had been doing this for a while. He said, I just have moments where I just feel happy. He says, I have moments where I just feel happy and I just wish that all beings could feel this way. And then he said, then I begin to, he says, I begin to see and understand what other people are suffering from and what they need. So the idea is if you train enough in extending this happiness to first to yourself and then to others, then gradually the skills come to us. So I'm still on the learning curve as far as that's concerned. But on the next page, Mingyur Rinpoche, he said, he begins to describe ordinary loving kindness and compassion, beginning with focusing on ourselves. He says, ordinary loving kindness and compassion has several phases. The first involves learning to develop a sense of tenderness toward oneself and an appreciation for one's own positive qualities. It doesn't mean that you're feeling sorry for yourself. It doesn't mean endlessly replaying suffering, scenarios of suffering or regrets and thinking about how differently things may have turned out if one or another circumstance in your life had been different. Rather, he said, it involves looking at your experience of yourself in the present moment as an object of meditative awareness. He says, in this case, we're not looking for the concept of I or me, but rather for the experience of being alive in this moment. Mingyur Rinpoche writes, if I were to achieve happiness and the cause of happiness, that would be very nice. Whoops. He said, but perhaps the simplest method of the variation on this loving kindness or scanning practice would be, is a kind of variation on the scanning practice described in relation to shamatha, of being aware of your physical sensation. And so then he encourages the reader to sit quietly and to work with, he says, he calls it taming your horse, where he said you sit in meditation posture and then allow your body to be relax into it. And then he says, taming the horse is moving the body into a meditative position, and taming the rider, he says, allowing your mind to simply relax in a state of objectless attention. And as you know, Mingyur Rinpoche is a proponent of open awareness practice, just allowing the body to be natural and the mind to come to rest in its own experience of the present moment of mind's natural awareness. And he says, when you do this, he says, after a few moments, he said, perform a quick, and he calls it scanning exercise. He says, instead of focusing on sensation, gently allow yourself to recognize that you have a body as well as a mind that's capable of scanning it. He says, allow yourself to recognize how wonderful these very basic facts of your existence really are, and how precious it is to have a body and mind capable of being aware of itself. Appreciating these gifts, he says, plants a seed for happiness and relief from suffering. He says there's such relief in simply knowing you're alive and aware. And I think very few of us take time to do this. But what he's saying is if we can detach from our stories about what's happening in our life long enough to just experience the simple experience of being alive in this moment and aware, he said this would be good. This would be good. He says, rest in the simple appreciation, then gently introduce the thought, how nice it would be if I were always able to enjoy this sense of basic aliveness. How nice it would be if I could always enjoy this sense of well-being and all the causes that lead to feeling contented and open to all possibilities. He said the words you may choose may vary according to your own temperament. He says in traditional Buddhist terms, these thoughts are expressed as a prayer. May I achieve happiness and the cause of happiness. May I be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. But the meaning is essentially the same. And he said you can think about it in words that work for you. Then he says, just allow your mind to rest, open and relaxed. He says, don't try to maintain this practice for more than a couple of minutes if you're practicing formally, or for more than a few seconds if you're practicing informally. In other words, you're not spending a great deal of time cultivating the awareness of being alive in this moment. Just enough, you're being just enough aware of it that you feel it fully and completely in your being. And he said it could just be a few seconds. He says if you're stuck in a traffic jam or in the midst of washing dishes, he says it's very important to practice in short sessions and allow your mind to rest. Otherwise, he said, this preciousness can become a concept rather than an experience. And then he says, this is something you can do over and over again. So you might, in the next week, take a little bit of time each day just to feel the experience of being alive in the moment and the gratitude you feel having a body and a mind that it can experience this aliveness and awareness. We're so busy in our stories that we seldom just realize how it is to, what a miracle it is to just be alive in the moment. And so he's reminding us to begin with our own being rather than thinking outward toward others just now. So maybe the first week of these exercises, you might just spend a few moments, even just like he says, washing the dishes or being stuck in traffic, which we all are from time to time. I know I was stuck in Columbus traffic today. So just having the experience of being there. So then he gives an exercise for the next iteration. He's calling it ordinary loving kindness and compassion, focusing on those close to us. Because first we start with ourselves, and then we begin thinking about others. He says, once you've become somewhat familiar with your own experience of relief to be alive, you can extend that possibility to others. In fact, he said, recognizing the suffering of others can transform your own experience. And then he tells the story of a friend of his who moved from Nepal to New York City in hopes of finding a better job and earning more money. That he had a high position in a carpet weaving factory in Nepal, but upon arriving in New York, the very best job he could find was working in a garage. He said this was a humiliating come down from his old job in Nepal. Sometimes he'd be so upset that he'd start to cry until one of his managers told him, "What are you doing crying? You can't do that. What would our customers think?" And then one day he noticed that someone new was working around the garage. A man in a big hat. Taking a closer look, he realized that the man in the hat was the owner of the factory, carpet factory in Nepal, where his friend had worked. He'd given up the business and traveled to New York in the same hope of finding, earning more money. But he ended up in the same position, working as an unskilled laborer in a job that paid less than what he made back in Nepal. And then at once he said, my friend recognized he wasn't the only person who had experienced a reversal of fortune. He was not alone. And Mingyur Rinpoche said, this is the second stage of ordinary loving kindness, acknowledging that whatever is going on inside someone else's mind is very similar to what's going on in your mind. He said, when we remember this, we gradually come to realize there's no reason to be frightened of anyone or anything. Most of the times we're frightened, he says, we're frightened because we don't recognize that whomever or whatever we're dealing with is just like us. It's like the poor person who was telling me about a bug, a very large bug, coming out of a tree and then landing on their head. And then both the person and the bug went, and she said it was a very weird experience to realize that the bug was just as scared as I was by falling out of the tree onto me. It terrified them. And she said that really made it a little more dealable. That I don't know if I could have that kind of presence of mind to realize that the bug would be just as scared as I was, but it can happen. In any case, Mingyur Rinpoche then says that often classic Buddhist texts, like the Great Path of Awakening, teach us that we should think first about our mothers, who have shown us the ultimate kindness by giving birth to us and caring for us when we were young. And he said most cultures, East and West, have traditionally encouraged respect, if not affection, toward one's mother and father both, in return for the sacrifices that they've made on our behalf. He said, but this traditional approach has changed a great deal over the past couple of generations. He said, quite a number of people I've spoken with in recent years don't necessarily have tender and affectionate relationships with their parents, especially in cases where the parents have been abusive, physically or verbally. In such cases, using one's mother or father as an object of loving kindness would not be very helpful, he said. It's perfectly okay to focus on another type of person, a kind of relative or a supportive teacher, a close friend, a spouse, a partner, or a child. Some people choose to think about the person who gives them unconditional love is their dog or their cat. The object of your meditation, he said, doesn't really matter. The important thing is to rest your attention lightly on someone or something toward which you feel a bond of warmth or tenderness. And then he said, this practice of ordinary loving kindness and compassion toward others differs a little from feeling it toward yourself. You begin in the same way by assuming the meditative posture and then allowing your body to rest naturally. Then he said, now rest for a few moments in this objectless attention. He said, relax in your seat as you would after accomplishing a big task, and just observe your mind and all the thoughts, feelings, and sensations that pass through it. After resting a few moments, he said, bring your attention to someone or something toward whom you feel tenderness, affection, or concern. He said, don't be surprised if the image of someone or something you didn't deliberately choose appears more strongly than the one you've decided to choose. This happens, and often it happens quite spontaneously. He said, one of my students began formal practice intending to focus on his aunt, who had been very kind to him when he was young, but the image that kept appearing to him was a puppy that he had owned as a child. This is just an example, Mingyur Rinpoche writes, of mind's natural wisdom asserting itself. This young person actually had a lot of warm memories associated with the puppy, And when he finally surrendered to his memories of the puppy, rather than trying to focus on his aunt, his practice became quite easy. That goes to show that sometimes we know ourselves more deeply than we expect. Then he says, after allowing this sense of warmth or affection to settle in your mind, he said, let it, I guess you could say, steep for a little while, alternating for a few minutes between these feelings and allowing your mind then to rest in objectless attention. So it's not a continuous effort to engender feelings of warmth towards someone. It's actually more resting the mind in its own natural awareness, and then from within that awareness, becoming concerned with the technique of thinking about someone that gives you a feeling of warmth and affection. He says, allow this sense of warmth and affection to settle in your mind. He says, as you alternate between these two states, the objectless attention and the feeling of warmth or affection, he says, allow yourself to wish that the object of your meditation, the parent, the child, the pet, make the aspiration that that person or being might experience the same sense of openness and warmth you feel toward them. He says, now, after doing this for a few moments, you can proceed in a couple of ways. One way is to imagine the object that you've chosen is in a very sad state. Of course, all beings are in samsara. So it's in some ways, it's not that difficult to think of the person as having suffering. He said, but he said, you can simply bring your mind to this person's present condition. And then he says, either way, he said, the image you call to mind naturally produces a profound sense of tenderness and connection, and a deep sense, a deep desire to relieve the pain. And then he said, another approach is to rest your attention lightly on whomever or whatever you've chosen, while thinking and asking to yourself, how much do I want to be happy? How much do I want to avoid pain and suffering? And again, you let these, let your thoughts on these points be as specific as possible. He says, for example, if you're stuck someplace that's very hot, would you rather move to a cooler, more open place? And if you feel some sort of physical pain, he says, would you like for that pain to be lifted? He said, as you think about your own answers, gradually turn your attention to the object and imagine how she or he would feel in the same situation. He said, practicing in this way not only opens your heart to other beings, but also dissolves your own identification with whatever pain or discomfort you may be experiencing in the moment. As my friend from Nepal discovered when seeing his former boss working in the same garage in New York, hiding his face under a big hat, we're not alone. People, puppies, and other creatures may seek to flourish and avoid pain in their own ways, but their basic motivations are quite similar. So these are exercises that he gives us in this first part of the chapter on empathy. For training, he gives us these techniques as methods to train our empathy. And I like the way he encourages us to develop these thoughts, alternating with the experience of allowing mind to rest. And I think the value in this is that sometimes when we try too hard to quote unquote focus on something in meditation, we find that our mind rebels against this continuous pressure. But when we alternate placing our attention on an object and then allowing the mind to rest in objectless attention, and then looking at the object and then resting, and then looking at the object and then resting, over and over again, we become more capable of seeing both things simultaneously. We can both feel the relaxation into the moment, into awareness, but also feel the experience of being human in the first exercise, feeling that gratitude for being human and having human experience. And in the second exercise, feeling that sense of goodness and extending it toward ourselves. And then in the third exercise, extending that feeling of warmth and tenderness toward others. Again, alternating with resting the mind and objectless attention. It makes it very fresh when you alternate. Whereas if you try, then the effortfulness of it gives ways to distraction, and we begin to try to escape from the practice. And by thinking of anything, we'll be ready and ripe for a distraction to take our attention away totally. So I want to give us some time to have some discussion on this. So I'm going to stop here, and because he gives a couple more exercises. And in the next class, we'll talk about working with beings, because we've talked about just resting in that feeling of being alive. That was exercise number 1. Exercise number 2 is having a feeling of love and compassion toward ourselves, and then developing a feeling of love and compassion toward another, whether it's someone who's close to us, whether it's a pet or a parent or anyone. And by doing this exercise, and Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche himself said that these empathy exercises should only be done for a short period of time. Even though you're alternating, it's still good to do a very short overall experience, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, not very long at all, in order to keep it fresh. So again, he teaches 3 exercises. The first one, just feeling the gratitude for being alive and the specialness of that. The second exercise, practicing love and compassion toward oneself. And then practicing love and compassion toward someone who we care about. And then next time we'll talk about people we don't like, and developing love and compassion for people we don't like. And then finally, developing what he calls immeasurable loving kindness and compassion. We might get all the way to the discussion of bodhicitta next time. So in which case we would complete the chapter and move on. But I'm really interested, I'll be very interested in hearing more about your experiences, but you may already have tried these exercises and have something to report. So if you have questions or thoughts or comments, feel welcome to, I guess you can use the raise hand function, or you can unmute and discuss. Oh, yes. Yes, Lisa. Hi.
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 Is it weird to, I know, is it weird to I mean, the compassion for yourself, is it normal to feel weird about doing that? I mean, it's easy for other people, but I don't know, it feels weird. I don't know, I can't explain it.
I think I understand. I think I mean, let me try something. Let me, see if I can I can express something that comes from my own experience, maybe. I think that for many of us, thinking about ourselves is just flat out uncomfortable. Flat out. I don't know if it's that we're shy people. Maybe we're shy, maybe we're a little on the introverted side.
Yeah.
And not really wanting to put ourselves out there, because if we stop being shy, then people will notice us, and then we're going to feel even more uncomfortable. So, right?
Mm-hmm.
But something that I try to encourage people to do when they feel like this is to to use a device that will help you to feel okay about taking care of yourself. Okay. I think a lot of it is because I don't know if you were an awkward teenager. I had my moments. I mean, even though I have this big personality, blah, 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 I really did feel awkward a lot. And I felt like I was sticking my foot in my mouth constantly, And
Yep.
and so I can kind of relate to that. So what I've encouraged, I encourage people to try these exercises, doing it for themselves. And think about it this way. Sometimes we do feel alone. Wouldn't it be nice if we could be present for ourselves when we feel alone? Right? Wouldn't that be great? So I tell people, imagine that you are the older sibling you never had. Because you see in the movies all these older siblings who are just wonderful, and that they're full of love for their younger siblings and stuff. Well, maybe you grew up with somebody like that, maybe you didn't. But we've always wanted that empathetic sibling who was just in our corner, right? Just there for us. And I said this to a young man once who expressed something very similar to you. And he said, I never really thought about showing up for myself, and being in my own corner. Like, I'm here to support, saying to yourself, I'm here to support you.
Yeah.
I'm here for you. I'm here for you. Right. And so maybe imagining that you're showing up for yourself in this way as an exercise to help yourself feel something, because we do have to, I mean, maybe we have to work at it harder than the extroverts, or maybe they're just as confused as we are and we project. Everybody, it's kind of like in the book, he's saying it's like everybody else has the happiness handbook and you don't have it. So sometimes we project outward that other people can do these practices, but we can't. But it really doesn't hurt to try. And just, I think that this is why that first exercise is so important. The feeling of gratitude for being alive. I know it almost sounded corny when I read it the first time. And then when I read it the second time, it started sounding less corny. But, if we take the time to just be grateful, wow, it helped me a lot too. So those are the two things that help, just that exercise and feeling gratitude for being alive. I mean, there are days, and you guys who live near the coast, you guys probably think about this more than we do. Because I mean, here in Ohio, it's either too darn cold or too darn hot. But you guys get those sea breezes sometimes, right? And everything like feels perfect, right? And so that perfect, when you feel that perfect day, just go, yeah, that's it. May all beings feel this way, right? May all beings have this experience of feeling this way. And I think that that'll help a little bit. That'll help a little bit. And then also just recognizing the need for it, the need to train yourself to feel like you want to be in your own corner. Like, I want to show up for myself. I want to be that older sibling I never had. And hopefully try those ideas and see if they help. Okay.
Love it. Thank you.
No, I really appreciate you asking, because there's so many, that are just, I mean, they don't want to call attention to themselves. They think that they'll be seen as being puffed up or, like self-absorbed, because we've all seen what that looks like, and that's not pleasant. But we have to try to, I mean, the Buddha taught the middle way, right? So we have to figure out what that looks like for us.
True. Thank you. That was good.
I really appreciate you asking. I see Daniel's hand is up. Go, Daniel.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. You used the word relax in doing this. And recently, Yongey Rinpoche, in a teaching, he said, when I'm in Nepal, everybody's really relaxed, but they're not really focusing well. But he said in America and Europe, everybody's really focused, but they're not relaxed. And he said, I even have Western students ask me, how do I relax? And he says, just relax.
I know. It's like a skill set they don't have, right? Wow. So what do you think about that? Do you have an idea?
Yeah, I noticed that when I'm relaxed, I am more grateful and I'm more able to open my heart and not be so focused on technique and just relax.
I'll tell you what, I think you're on to something there. And I think that I think I'm going to make a joke and say it's like a transitive verb, it's like if you have difficulty with relaxation, then work on gratitude.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I guess I could say I'm spitballing a little bit here, but I mean, but the idea is that I feel that where he's on to something, where he says, just feel how good it is, to be in like a nice environment. Just, you feel kind of decent. You don't hurt any place right this minute or whatever. But I also think of gratitude from the point of view that I could have been born anywhere, anytime, but here I am. Wow. And all the stuff I've been through in my life, I'm still here. Wow. And I'm wondering if that can't help a little bit.
Yeah.
Just feeling that. And attempting to, the relaxation part, I think, is because we try so hard to do everything, isn't it? We try to relax,
Well, I think especially us baby boomers, I mean, we had so much pressure to get everything right.
Yeah, right. I think that's true, because there were so many hopes placed in us because mom and dad, survived something horrible.
Yeah.
No matter where you were in the world, there was something horrible to experience. The loss of people you love, warfare, and they wanted their life to be so different. They couldn't have that life, so they tried to give it to the kids, But there's a lot, human beings, they go through so much, right? But I think the other thing that helped me with relaxation was the recognition that I didn't have to get it right, that just being there and showing up with my breath and doing shamatha was good, and then if you do that over time, I also think age helped. Because I think that part of the problem is ambition. I know that may not have been the point you wanted to make, but I think that when we feel a lot of ambition, that we want things to be a certain way, or we would like to accomplish things, then there's a tension that surrounds that whole endeavor, And but I really appreciate you bringing up what Yongey Rinpoche had to say about culturally how different the cultures were, but they still struggle. It's, but I do feel that gratitude and relinquishing the grip of ambition, I think those two things are helpful. Because I joined a little late, I'll go a little longer and take another question if there, or another comment.
Can I just make a quick comment?
Sure.
One is somebody suggested to me, because I've had issues with almost everything, to just talk to myself as if I'm talking to my own self as a child, my little Mayu. And
Yeah.
so I remember saying to my daughter a while back, although lately I've been challenged again, but saying to her that I found myself, instead of before, I would constantly be criticizing, like I didn't do this right, or I didn't do that right, or whatever. And then I found myself suddenly saying, "Oh, I'm really proud of you, Maya, for doing that. That was really good of you." And it was so relaxing, actually, to be able to do that, instead of the critical parent, to my little self.
Yeah.
So that was helpful. And but I also like the whole idea of what you said, because I know sometimes I tend to focus too intently on things. And so that whole idea of just jumping back and forth, like giving it a moment and just being grateful for that little moment. The other thing is, because I am going through a challenging period, I remembered how the gratitude thing was supposed to be so good. So I started doing the gratitude journal, and for me, it's just every day to say 5 things I'm grateful for. And sometimes it's just grateful that I made it through the day. But I think in general, it's been helping me to do that practice, because there's been a lot of things that have just been really difficult. So when I do that, I usually do it before I go to bed. So it puts me at the end of my day because in the beginning of the day, I have the things that I need to accomplish. So at the end of the day, if I list what I'm grateful for, it just helps me to be, in general, focusing more positively. So I just found that gratitude practice really essential for me.
I really appreciate you sharing that. It reminds me of a bumper sticker I saw once that said, "It's never too late to have a happy childhood."
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and because sometimes I felt like that I never really lived, that I was just always just trying to accomplish something. And now I'm old, and I think, oh my gosh, do I want to experience the end of my life that I never really, so it's just important to to do those little things that make you feel happy. And also, I guess now the fact that I am living with my family, and I realize, like, it was very challenging with us all living together this year, after I moved. But I also realized, like, I'm spending more time with my grandsons and just reading wonderful stories with them. And so, yeah, you really have to be grateful for whatever you have at that in any given moment. And I think you're right. If you do that for yourself, it's easier to do it for other people, so just thank you for all these reminders. It was really helpful. Thank you.
yeah, I feel like everybody brings their sincerity to these gatherings, right? They bring their self and what they've been through and what they've accomplished and what they've learned in there along the way. And I think that that's why spaces like this are so important, and I'm so happy that you provide them there. It's Southern California. I just really appreciate it, because I think that when we share these kinds of feelings and among ourselves, that we develop this camaraderie, and we develop this, this mutual support. And I think it's incredibly important, because we do feel isolated sometimes, and we can create these spaces to be in and practice together and talk about these things. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Well, we'll have to stop, unfortunately, for this evening. But I'm hoping that these exercises are useful, and that you try them. And then if you have some thoughts, you can write them down and bring them next time. Because we're going to be talking a little bit more about the more difficult people, and how to begin to weave them into our life and our work as well. So, so for now, I'll have to say good night, but I'd like to gather together all the goodness, just kind of gather it all together that we've put together this evening by sharing our thoughts and feelings and our experiences in meditation and life, and make the aspiration that all beings everywhere find their path into inner stability and goodness, and that they all become awakened Buddhas and emanate in all directions and benefit sentient beings endlessly. The short prayer goes like this: through this merit, may all achieve the omniscience of Buddhahood. May it defeat our common enemy, wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may we free all beings. May we free all beings. May we free all beings. Thanks, everyone. Great to see you.
Thank you, Lama Kathy.
Yeah,
you.
I'm waving at all the folks. It's nice
That was
to see
beautiful.
you here tonight. Yay.
Mhm.
All right. Well, you have a good evening. Om Mani Padme Hung.
Mhm.
Night.